Can science and religion be compatible? Have they ever been compatible? What does it mean to be a scientist? What does it mean to be religious? Hello, today at Auditing with Autism, where I discuss philosophy and music, art and religion, the world condition and the human condition, I'm going to discuss a little bit about the history of science and religion and talk a bit about how art has played a role, bring a few quotes in with my quote book. I hope everybody's doing great today. I sure am, and I'm feeling the spirit to make this video. You know, I went to a Catholic seminary a while back in the early aughts, and I wasn't a Catholic when I went there, so I was observing this experience from an objective point of view and watching, these people go through the experience as they prepare themselves to be Catholic priests. The experience was so edifying and so enjoyable and really so very good that I became a Catholic. What I learned was that this particular religion, and I found out later that most religions, they tend to be originating from a true, pure source, this idea that humans are connected to the real world. And we want to understand that connection. And most of these major religions at their origin are beginning to investigate this connection that we have to our physical world. The Greeks called it philosophy, and religions are basically, I've discovered, they're trying to create a recipe in how to learn about the world around them and an order for the people following these religions and following that recipe, in order for them to live their daily life in a way that would most benefit them, as they live their life. And something like that I've always found a connection to. I've always had a philosophy around the idea of being connected to nature and to the life that we're living. And so when I started to see these fundamental congruencies in the major religions at their origins, I discovered that I was treating religion in a cultural way, where I basically just sort of wrote off all religion as bad because I thought they were doing bad things, and so they must never have any good thing to do, right? So what I learned was the good things that they had to do, and mostly religions are good in their beginning, and later on people tend to discover that religions have a way of grouping people in large groups, getting them to think the same way. And so bad people begin to use the organizational benefits of religion for their own agendas. And this is usually when we see religions going off the rails and doing incredibly bad and weird things that we wouldn't call good for the human condition. And therefore, these religions that are doing this would get a bad reputation for being a religion and all that means, which is to benefit mankind. But I wanted to discuss that science and religion have an origin based on each other. Basically, religion is an investigation into the human condition. And so it is, I believe, one of the earliest forms of science. Philosophy is the same thing, where it's looking for knowledge, and all religions are based off of some form of philosophy. And again, the major religions are based on a form of philosophy that continues this investigation of the human condition and the world around them. And they do this usually in an almost scientific way. I can speak to Catholicism because of my experience at the seminary. And what I learned was this incredible thing that the history of the Catholic Church is steeped in education and basically learning about the world around them in an almost scientific way. As long as the groups that are Catholic are not being influenced by the outside culture and are pure, they tend to stay pure to the idea of philosophy or learning about the world around them, epistemology, learning about knowledge in general. Once they become influenced by outside culture and people that are not really genuine actors for knowledge, then these religions become influenced and start going off the rails and doing bad things to other people. But I wanted to bring up uh, two people that are, saints in the Catholic Church, Saint Benedict and his twin sister, Saint Scholastica. These twins, they lived about 1,500 years ago. And Saint Benedict is the originator of the Benedictine order, an order of Catholic monks. And the word Benedict is basically Latin for good word, benediction. And, the good word is basically what, some people would say the Catholic religion is all about. But it's his twin sister, Saint Scholastica, that I want to really focus on right now, because we get our word school and scholastics from her name. And her name, she got her name from, it's a Greek word, but it does mean, school. It means a place. Scholastica means a place where minds would come together to learn and debate about knowledge. So Saint Scholastica, being a woman, but also being the sister of a man who had organized a monastery of men who were learning, she also wanted to create a group of people who were learning. But being a woman, she couldn't, they wouldn't allow her to become a member of the Benedictine order of monks. And so she creates her own educational system for women and other people that are not able to become a monk. And this is how we start to see the system of universities flowering in the West. Saint Scholastica starts creating an education system that is the model for our universities that we see grow out of that. And so we can thank most of our education system that we know of today, and even the word school and scholastics, to this beautiful woman who was so strong in spirit that she, stood up to men in the times, the bigotry of her day, to create a system of education that we are using even today. Boy, I like it when that light turns on. It looks good. But anyway, so I'm going to just talk a little bit more about how religion and science definitely cohabitate. They are something that I think grow together almost always, and out of out of a natural order of things. First, I wanted to talk about how did we lose the idea of religion and science being together. It's common knowledge now that I think a lot of people believe that science and religion are dichotomous. They can't hang out together at all. One excludes the other. And that's just not true. I can sort of prove that by saying a simple sentence by a French philosopher named Francois Lyotard. In about 50 years ago, he wrote this sentence. He said, quote, "The elements of language and the elements of reality are analogous," unquote. They're mirrored. So every time we use language to describe something new, we're creating a word for that. We're using art to create that word. And then what we're describing is science. We're describing something that is outside of ourselves, and we're trying to explain to another person what this thing that or object is that we're describing. So to give an example, the word sunflower, when I say the word sunflower, I'm talking about a plant and what kind of plant I'm talking about. But the word sunflower is really, it's, two words, sun and flower. And so artistically, we used two words we had already come up with, sun and flower, to describe this new object, this particular plant called sunflower. It describes this plant. It's a plant, it's a flower, and it stands in the sun. It's a sunflower. In Spanish, they have an even better word for sunflower. They use the word girasoles. Girasoles means literally turn with the sun. So in their description of this plant, they're actually telling us what the plant is doing. Not only is it a flower, not only does it stand in the sun, but it literally will turn with the sun, just like a sunflower does. And so you can see how we're coming up with words artistically to describe a scientific object and effect. And so this is why I can see, or explain how science and art are connected intrinsically. Every time we try to create new words to describe our reality, we're coming up with artistic values for these words. And so religion and science are intricately connected because religion is historically been doing this. It's been describing the world around us and coming up with new words to do this. I want to talk about a quick quote that I took out of philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein's book, The Tractatus, where he says, quote, "The world is full of objects, but that's what they remain until intellectual interaction. Then they become facts, facts of relation." And so, that's an important quote because it's telling us that, until a mind interacts with an object, that object basically has no history in the human world at all. And without that history, it's not a scientific fact. But to become historical as an object and therefore a scientific fact, human interaction is not only necessary, but human interaction has to create using art. It has to create new words and sounds. Maybe, we could illustrate new illustrations, new descriptions for these new objects. And, that's exactly what religion is doing. It's giving us new descriptions for new experiences that we are having in the real world. The only trouble with religion is that not every actor, not every human is having these same experiences. So, for example, you could put just about every human on the planet in front of a sunflower, and barring a few disabilities, most people will be able to look at the sunflower and describe what it is. But when it comes to the human experience of God or spirituality or religion, that doesn't always happen. Not every human has the same experiences there. And, the Buddhists describe why they say that, as we are reincarnated, we come back with different spiritual levels of experience. And not everybody has those same exact levels of experience. And so this may be why some people, have a different religious experience. But I'm more of the opinion that it's a lack of education. You know, like I was saying, in my experience in seminary, I was not a Catholic. I wasn't extremely spiritual. I didn't go to church. But I had grown up knowing all about God and what spirituality is. And so I was extremely open to the idea of what, was going on at seminary. I was curious as all get out. I was curious as hell, as you might say, as to what they were doing at seminary. I couldn't believe I had this opportunity to be there without really without the pressure that these young men go through to become priests, which is a lot of pressure. Hats off and respect to these guys that are going through the discernment process. There's a lot of work that they do, not just the effort of college and all the classes and tests, but they also have a lot of social work that they do during that time, as well as their own work that they're doing, inside themselves, their own discernment. Anyway, I was impressed by the caliber of person I witnessed up there. Just about everybody up there was at the seminary was, a better person than me. course, there's always a few weirdos in every group, and I'm probably that in most groups myself. But I'm not out to hurt anybody, and so the worst weirdos of any group are the ones that are actually hurting somebody else. Anyway, so to continue with the idea that science and religion are married and always have been, I want to talk about this idea quote that I came up with. That's basically talking about the logical, how our experiences are logical. It says here, quote, all experience is necessarily logical. I say we search for knowledge through our judgments and evaluations of nature, the world, the space around it, the universe. That's what I describe nature as, the world, space, and the universe. I continue to say this search is inherently the very definition of experience, and due to its intellectual necessity, is also inherently logical. Of course, this is to say that which does not require intellectual activity is not logical. For example, sleeping, or I'm trying to read small work. A brain does work during sleeping times. Mindless activity, well, even sleeping, even though I'm writing, I discovered that later that the brain does give us intellectual activity when we're sleeping. It's a mindless intellectual activity. So that mindful intellectual activity is what I'm discussing here. And that experience is necessarily logical, because it's an experience that we are continually judging on. We want to make sure we don't run into a rock. We want to make sure that, we're not too cold. Everything that we experience while we're mindful and awake is, we're judging those experiences and scientifically making little notes in our brain. And this is basically what the scientific method is doing. They're just keeping a better record of it and seeing if everybody else has that experience. There's a philosopher named Ernest Nagel. I hope I'm saying his name right. Ernest Nagel. He wrote something interesting. He says here that a judicious confidence in the power of reason to ennoble the human estate may seem shallow to an age in which, despite the dominant position in it of a scientific technology, there is a growing and pervasive distrust of the operations of free intelligence. But the cultivation of the intellectual temper is a fundamental condition for every liberal civilization, unquote. And he's writing this during a time when a lot of people were sort of distrusting the new science that was coming out. Quantum mechanics basically freaked everybody out. And chemistry was really surprising during the 20s and the 30s. It was surprising people what they could do with chemistry. And so there was sort of a pushback, that this idea that this free intelligence could maybe ruin our human condition. And I think that's still a concern. But this may be a pushback to the philosopher who, about 50 years before Nagel wrote this, in the late 19th century, Friedrich Nietzsche is telling us in a book, Zarathustra, that his protagonist exclaims that God is dead. And, if you're into philosophy, you know that Nietzsche never said that himself. He wrote that in a book, and it was his protagonist who said that. So the author, Nietzsche, is sort of using the protagonist to say something sarcastically or even give us a warning. But instead, what culture did was culture took that sentence, God is dead, and ran with it and thought that's what Nietzsche was saying himself. And so, it's really interesting to see how people can misconstrue things. But at the end of the 19th century, the culture said God is dead. And they had a lot of reasons to not like religion. At this point, religions, especially in the West, Christian religions had been taken over by a bunch of maleficent minds with agendas, and they were using the institutions of religion to do damage to the human condition. Clearly, I mean, it's obvious. And so I don't think that, I mean, you can blame people for doing bad things. You can blame institutions for doing bad things. But the idea behind these institutions, these religions, the original pure source for these ideas are not to hurt anybody ever. And they're also not to be taken over, to be, used in somebody's agenda. But my point is that when Nietzsche said God is dead, he didn't really mean that. But culture took it up and ran with it. And, it's still a place where I think we are at, where people are thinking that, there is no God in the universe, and that science is the only thing that matters. Well, this quote by Ernest Nagel is telling us that there was a time in the 30s and 40s where whole groups of people were distrusting the new science and these what they called free intelligence thinkers using this new science of chemistry and physics to come up with these radical new possibilities, which we are living with today, like computers. Computers are using, quantum physics in every computer chip, so we're using quantum physics constantly in our technology. Thank God. um, so I wanted to mention something about how culture is affecting everybody, and I hope I can find it. Let's see if I can find my little quote about the culture. Yeah, here it is. Again, this is Francois Lyotard, and he says this in 1962 about culture. He says, cultural desire is the desire to put an end to the exile of meaning as external to activities. Cultural desire is the desire to put an end to the exile of meaning as external to activities. So one thing culture has going for it is that it gives meaning to these things that used to be outside or on the fringe. It gives us a description, a name, an experience with these things. And experience is the name of the game, right? It's learning new things. This is what it's always been about. And that's why I'm saying science and religion are always married, because religion has historically been an investigation into the human condition with its relationship to the source or God. And science is doing exactly the same thing, except that they are deciding not to talk about knowing about the source. And as I explained, through philosophers Wittgenstein and Chris Langan and just common, I mean, it seems like it's easy to get to a place where you can see that there is no universe without the universe being created by something. And whatever that thing is, we're calling that thing God, right? To take that out of the equation because you're a scientist is to really be missing a huge part of science. To continue, he says about culture, culture is a desire to give meaning to those things which are usually outside of culture, to bring it into the fold. He continues, he says, quote, "It is at the same time the desire to put an end to the exile of activities as estranged from their sense." Kind of saying the same thing there. He says, its instrument cannot be the university, which dwells in this very exile and is the product of it even. Nor can speech alone be its instrument of culture. Now we must look for the acts in which this desire is already silently present. We must hear in these acts the call of a sense, a call that has no truck with the operational world, but that is nevertheless utterly contemporary. We must make the call ring out at the cost of transgressing or destroying the apparatus that stifle it. We must find the ways to make it ring out, the opportunities and the means. That is what it means to take culture literally. And I find, unquote, and I find that beautiful because he's not denigrating culture. He's not saying it's this terrible thing that makes you, leads you to some terrible cult. He's actually saying, culture is yours. Use it. Like other people have said, if you don't like the culture you're in, make it different. Be the change that you want to be. And ultimately, if you can't do that, then you maybe go to a place where the culture is the way that you want it to be. But what he's really saying here is that culture is this necessary thing that humans have created to learn more about the world around them. And culture is just like science and religion and art in the sense that it can also be taken over by bad actors that try to influence and convince us of their own agendas. So finally, I think the great last thought that I would like to throw out is this idea that we need to be wary of people and their outside agendas and reasons for things. And so to do that, we need to be, mindful enough, maybe even educated enough to have the brain to be able to think our way out of when we're being taken advantage of. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. A quick personal story here. I grew up for my first 6 to 8 years basically outside of culture. I grew up, in the woods, on farms, in orchards. I was not around a lot of people and a lot of cities and stuff. I went through them a bunch of times, but I basically spent most of my time alone. And what that did for me was that made me a very skeptical person, because when I did go into culture, I was already old enough to be an objective observer of culture. And so I'll never forget, one of the first few thoughts that I remember thinking when I entered, culture, basically when I joined public school at third grade, but was that, this didn't happen in school, but it happened in the city and on TV a lot, where I would have, what I'm talking about is I would see advertisers trying to convince me to buy their product. And I was calling bullshit on these commercials constantly as an 8-year-old, because it seemed obvious to me that they were, trying to get us to do something that they wanted. And, they were bullshitting us. And I didn't like that. I didn't like how that made me feel, and I didn't want to be taken advantage of. It was easy to fall in line. It wasn't too long after I joined public school that I wanted to have these same toys and the same artifacts that these other kids had, and for usually the same reasons, so that we could play together and have experiences together. And so I began to see how effective the advertising, the advertisements were. And so I paid attention a lot to it. And what I remember is that around the time of President Reagan during 1980, in the United States, I think it was the Federal Communications Commission, they allowed TV to change. During the 70s, when I was a kid, I'd watch TV and it was almost always some educational program, especially Sesame Street, The Electric Company, Mr. Rogers. But then after that, after President Reagan became president and he changed the rules, he allowed for marketing to happen. And so instead of having TV where kids are basically learning a moral of the story or, some scientific fact through cartoons and fun, puppet shows or whatever, instead of that, now TV was open to being a commercial. The cartoons themselves ended up being a commercial for products. And so I was old enough to see the difference even as I was a kid. And I was totally turned off. I mean, the Smurfs, the strawberry cup shortcake, My Little Pony, the Care Bears, the G.I. Joes. I mean, all these guys came around, all these cartoons came around right at the same time. And I was old enough to see that they were selling us and they weren't really being good for us. The Care Bears may be an exception. They definitely had something that I liked there. the moral of the story with the heart and the different emotions on their chest. There was something good there. But anyway, I'm sort of digressing. Science and religion, you can't get away from. They both exist together. It's discussing the same topic. When I see scientists talking about some new force they've learned, a particle they've discovered, or some scientific fact that they're involved in, I can clearly can see that's exactly how these monks from 1500 years ago, these Greeks from 2000 years ago, or these people from India 3000 years ago were also trying to explain the world around them. And the only difference is today, the scientists are choosing not to talk about where this universe stems from or originates from. And maybe that's good. Maybe it's good to get away from these religious agendas that had been going on for like the past 500 years in such terrible ways. Maybe it's good to break free from that stuff. But I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater either. To stop thinking about God and its influence on our universe, I think would be a big miscarriage of human justice, you might say. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. And I quickly want to lastly mention that art has a role to play in all of this. That's what I believe scientists are doing. They're doing something called art when they create new experiments, when they build a laboratory for themselves even, and make experiments happen in that laboratory. It's an artistic adventure. It's an adventure, not just a venture. It's an adventure. And certainly when I play music or create art in any other way, I'm involved in the world around me in such a way that it's easily described as scientific. As I was discussing with somebody in the comment section recently, the philosopher Plato, he definitely talks about the way notes change and make sounds and the intervals, and how scientific that is. That's a very scientific concept concerning frequencies and things like that. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too far right now because I'm trying to end the video. But at any rate, I think that's about it. I just wanted to talk about a little bit about the science and religion. They're always going to be together, and hopefully, I guess the idea is hopefully we don't ever really lose either one. I think science and religion are continuing this investigation of the human condition, and so what good is somebody could say, well, what good is religion? Why not just stick with science? Well, obviously, as I said, science has lost this connection to the source of the universe, and possibly any idea outside of, any mystical idea outside of the scientific method. And so maybe we can find ways to increase the experience of religion for more people so that everybody can see the sunflower. And when they go to have a religious experience, everybody can see or feel this experience, and not just a few. And with that in mind, I think I would like to leave this topic with the idea of, if you're interested in having a religious experience, go check out Terence McKenna. Terence McKenna is a person who, as a scientist first and as a religion experiencer second, will describe specifically how everybody might cut right through the center of the mandala and go straight to the religious experience without having to, work through somebody else's agenda. I guess that's a good way to put it. That's a good way to end the video. Have a great day, you guys. I love you all. Bye-bye.